Although the history of Black Britain goes back many centuries, the black presence in Britain is woven into the temporality of the arrival of Windrush in the 1940s. Those early images, captured on film, saw black and brown migrants from the Caribbean arriving in Britain. This film explores the contribution that black British film has made to cultural memory, to society, and to the anti-racist cause. It takes us on a journey to explore the past, present and future of this significant part of national and diasporic cinema, and considers its transformative potential.
I don't think I enter filmmaking, documentary filmmaking, like many other people entered it. I didn't enter it in order to become a well-known documentary filmmaker. I entered it in order to use documentary film to serve the broader political purpose that my life was engaged with.
When I was younger, I just watched lots of TV, I watched lots of films. I think it was just like a way of, I grew up on TV.
Growing up in Kingston, Jamaica, you come to see the rest of the world through cinema. And so I would say that's my first connection to film.
I had never imagined that I would make films. Coming from a village in Barbados, coming here when I was 6 years old, into a working class situation, the idea of film never occurred to me.
I was attracted to working in cinema, especially on the programming side, probably about 30 years ago. And mainly, I think, just as a punter watching films, mainly on TV, ITV, Hammer House to BBC Two late night films in the 70s, and being really affected by the films that I saw, emotionally affected, psychologically affected, being entertained and delighted.
I didn't have access so much to cinema growing up as a teenager, but I did have access to things like Saturday BBC matinees. So in came film, and then I sort of schooled myself on being a kind of cinephile through the medium of television. I got really excited about that and thought, yeah, I can do this. And it was as simple as hiring a VHS camera at the time. And that's where it began, really, for me.
I mean, certainly when I was going through art school, none of the people who taught me were people of colour.
I applied to London Film School, and it was a postgraduate course, and I hadn't even done a degree. It wasn't that I felt inferior, it was in the world of film. Do you know what I mean? In that you're entering into this world where you're not there, there are no reference points for you here as a black person.
Studied politics at university and kind of assumed that that was something I was going to potentially go into. As throughout studying, I kind of was drawn to a lot of work by people like Marlon Riggs, who made me think that I would be able to say something slightly more powerful in the medium of film.
Brother to brother, 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 brother to brother.
The whole film was about him trying to come to terms with his identity. It had poems in it, dance. It was like a documentary, but then it was also like, there was also fictional elements to it. It left me thinking about what my life is going to look like when I get older.
To racism, yeah. We will not bow down to injustice. We will not bow down to exploitation. What you gonna do? I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand. I'm gonna stand.
From the mid-1970s, young black working class people begin to emerge from schools where they've been having a bad time and begin to be are obliged to look for jobs, find that they've not been prepared for it and no space has been prepared to give them jobs in. And beyond that, if they're on the streets not working, they begin to be the special targets of a police force and the state that's thinking, if you're hanging around, you must be up to mischief. And it doesn't take long before those sorts of confrontations become serious clashes. That's going on, and eventually big riots, confrontations occur. These are so serious and so consistent that the establishment realizes that it has to be seen to be doing something in response to these demands. And in the first instance, what happens is that the establishment is so shocked at what it looks like to the rest of the world and all the rest, that they really begin to open some doors rather wide.
Of course, you remember the riots, and not only the riots, but the results of those. A, why they happened, and B, how the society and the country reacted to them.
Essentially, independent filmmakers, black, white, brown, everything, got together and said, we need a forum, a higher profile forum to make our work. And this is when you know this is a different time. The government said, sure, there's Channel 4, take it. I mean, you cannot imagine this happening now.
Channel 4 was a truly radical media intervention at the start. It was the first space in which they could put on regular strands to make quite challenging film about this country and so on.
The government gave a bunch of independent filmmakers a whole channel, which was run by independent filmmakers. They were essentially left-wing, they were politically independent. They were telling stories from social communities that hadn't been told before. They were using aesthetics that hadn't been used before. So Black Audio Film Collective was one of those, Sankofa was one of those, Chedo was one of those, Retake was one of those. So there's a whole bunch of Black and Asian filmmakers that basically were funded for years by Channel 4 to make work for the network.
There were these little collective, independent and collective, and I thought, wow. And they were kind of documenting, doing various things. And I felt we need to have something similar to that. And so I hit on the idea of doing a workshop. And at that time, it was post the riot. It was in an era where money was now being given to kind of quell Black uprising.
If you take a film like Hands with Songs by Black Audio Film Collective, which is an essay film, it's a documentary essentially, but it's a piece of visual poetry. It's what John O'Comfort and the Black Audio Collective were known for doing. So it wasn't just the fact that they told the story of the riots in Handsworth. What they did is they layered it through layers of archive and memory and testimony and idea.
We were the first ones to kind of introduce community training in terms of equipment, getting people to actually handle and work with this equipment. So my vision was to kind of have this structure working that would then lead to us documenting our history. Our films were very much geared towards the Black community, with Black community issues. The funding was quite amazing. We had 4 full-time people, and I think 1 part-time, working. Imagine. That didn't include the equipment that we had. It didn't include the funding for the films that we made. So it was it's a golden period, really, because, at the time you don't really think about it, but looking back, it's an era that will never come again. And in terms of that kind of freedom, that kind of resources that were given, because Channel 4 were like funding 40 to 50,000 per documentary.
Injustice, we will not obey. Exploitation, I'm gonna stand.
I did a propaganda film, very strongly, in my mind, was a propaganda film, which was called Blood of the Run, which was about the New Cross March and the New Cross Fire. And it had the same impact almost as Grenfell at the time, because you had a fire which killed 14 young Black people at a party. And up to today, no one knows who did it. But at the time, we were convinced as a community that it was a racist attack. And then out of that came Brother Garun. And I made it in a way which was very similar to the propaganda films of the 1940s, the war films, where you had this commentary that was just telling you and just driving
The
it.
15th of September, 1940. The air communique announced 185 enemy planes down. Why did the world accept the accuracy of our figures?
Because in that time, I felt we were in a war.
Blood I go run! Blood I go run! Blood I go run!
After the racist murder by fire of 13 young black people in January 1981, there could be no going back for the black communities. The chants, the rage of this march, 2 months later, were to be a final warning. For a near bankrupt capitalist Britain, 1981 was to be a year of blood and burning.
The way that, for instance, the People's Account in Chedo presents the actuality, the lived reality of a moment on the Broadwater farm that is presented so differently in world news, in national media and national television.
The police had entered the Jarrett's home using keys illegally taken from her son, Floyd, whom they had wrongfully arrested and forcibly charged earlier on the 5th of October, the day of his mother's death.
Was again something that was really significant in giving this idea of a specific way of looking at an event that other people would never get an opportunity to know, because it's not going to happen in the mainstream press. And at the time, of course, that film was banned. It was banned by television, it was banned by the regulators. But as a historical record, it is so important that these things exist and that people's voices who are involved have the opportunity to present something different.
It is hard to talk to people now in Britain, even in Britain, for them to realize how tumultuous the times were politically back in the 70s, 80s. And not just that people were angry and rowing up, but like people were organizing. People imagined that we could organize and turn the society around. Maybe some of that is returning now in a Britain of Jeremy Corbyn, but it's a long time since we've had that kind of feeling that it was possible, not just to complain about this system, but actually to turn it about. And so it was in that kind of context that the film Black Britannica was made.
In fact, we were invited to Britain to do certain jobs, on the buses and the underground, in the sweatshops, in the foundries, in the hospitals. We did the dirty jobs, the uncomfortable jobs, for low pay. And we met racism. The riots in Notting Hill Gate in 1958 were evidence of this. But more than that, the economy was going into deeper and deeper recession. Unemployment was rising. The working people were getting restive. Among other things, the state reached for the weapon of racism.
We showed it in a cinema on the other cinema, had a cinema on the Tottenham Court Road, and we showed it for just a few weeks. One gets to understand very quickly, if you make serious things like that, how the state works. They spoke to British politicians, amongst other people. They rounded on the other cinema, and within a couple of weeks, they had to take it off. They said, we've researched, we found that you didn't ever pay copyright fees for exploiting